In Washington, D.C., if the glass breaks in the middle of the night and you're all alone there, you cannot own any type of firearm at all to defend yourself against the people that would kill you. And that's not reasonable, and it's unconstitutional, and I believe that's the way the court's headed.
You know, I have to tell you, I'm confused because the Bush administration came out, the Justice Department, and filed a brief that said, you know, you can't go crazy here and give everybody every right. And I mean, they kind of, in a way, came out against our right to own guns. And yet Dick Cheney came out, first time a vice president has ever done this, and said, I just want you to know I don't agree with the administration and the Justice Department. What's that all about?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, for the first time in history, more members of Congress signed that amicus brief than any other time. Over 55 senators, 250 members of the House of Representatives, the Vice President of the United States. And I think what that represents is the will of the American people saying this is our freedom, it's our right, it's our individual right, and we are not going to be denied this freedom.
You know, Wayne, I've been reading the Founding Fathers an awful lot because I just think our country is in real trouble. We're losing so much of what we started at. And as I read the actual words of the Founding Fathers and I see what they talked about, they knew that they were afraid of government. They were not afraid of, you know, bears coming out of the woods. They wanted people to have the right to protect themselves against an out-of-control government. When did we lose a court system to this evolutionary law that we have now, where they look at, well, let's look at what we said back in 1940 or 1939 or 1920. When did they stop looking at the Founding Fathers' intent?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, from the 1700s up until the 1950s, it was unquestioned it was an individual right. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Patrick Henry, Sam Adams, George Mason, all individual right. Justice Story, the most noted Supreme Court justice in the 1800s, other than John Marshall, individual right. When Congress looked at this after the Civil War and said we're going to restore the rights of slaves, Second Amendment, individual right. It wasn't until you got this Miller decision that still said it was an individual right. It talked about a sawed-off shotgun, whether it was appropriate for militia use, but it said it's individual, it's the individual right of citizens. That's been twisted in the last 20 years and turned into a lie that became this popular fairy tale that somehow in the Miller decision they said it was only a collective right of the government. Well, right. The American public knows better than that.
This has been going on in Washington, D.C. for years and years. It's 30 years. Somebody asked me today, Glenn, how come this is now 30 years on the books and it's just now being challenged? My explanation was nobody wanted to push it on either side because they were kind of happy with the stalemate because you didn't know which direction it was going to come out. Is that an accurate statement, would you say?
Yeah, I think we were trying to repeal it in Congress. The district residents were upset about it, but I think people were worried about people on the Supreme Court legislating from the bench as opposed to interpreting the Constitution as it's written. But this D.C. law, it's been on the books 32 years. It's a miserable failure. It's one of the crime capitals of America. It's taken away protection on the part of the law-abiding people. And the D.C. criminal justice system is a revolving door. If it catches the bad guys at all, it takes them in, it turns them back out. It's open season on the honest citizens, and the honest citizens don't want to be denied their constitutional right to protect themselves anymore. And what D.C. needs to do is when they catch violent felons with guns, drug dealers with guns, criminals with guns, put them in jail. That'll make people safe, not taking guns from the law-abiding people.
Wayne, thank you very much.
Welcome back, YouTube, to the Ron Paul 2008 channel's feature on You Choose 2008. Today, you're going to hear Dr. Paul talk about defending your Second Amendment rights.
The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, is important to a lot of Americans. Why do you think that is?
Well, the founders were very clear about it, and the assumption went without saying that everybody can have a gun to go out hunting because everybody was a hunter. But they wanted to be explicit that individuals own guns because they never wanted to populace disarmed. Matter of fact, they encouraged and they believed that each community and each state would have a militia, which was just a group of people who could be called up in an emergency to be deputized for protection. But the gun really was, that Second Amendment was provided, ironically, and a lot of people don't understand this, but it was to protect against abuse of government, because they needed guns to protect against the abuse of the king. They saw the Second Amendment as very, very important. Of course, I see it as so important because I think it was the lack of respect for the Second Amendment that contributed a whole lot to the disaster of 9/11. Because if individuals are responsible to defend themselves or their property, my guess is that if the government hadn't taken over security on the airlines, maybe the airlines would have said that a pilot could have kept a pistol up front and don't let anybody mess around. But unfortunately, before 9/11, they weren't allowed to have guns. They're still really not allowed. At the same time, the government told us not to resist. Right. So they did exactly the opposite. No wonder, well, this was an opening for people who wanted to do us harm. But the Second Amendment is crucial. And if you think about it, you know, the lack of respect for the Second Amendment is in the areas of our country that needs the Second Amendment the most. And this is, to me, so discriminatory, and that's in our inner cities. You go to the inner cities where there's the most crime, and yet if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're not allowed to defend against the crime. Right. So you're not allowed to have a gun in the inner city. So this, to me, is discriminatory. And, of course, there's a lot of laws against guns and drugs, and yet you have more violence in so many inner cities. So I think respect for the Second Amendment would go a long way to helping cut down on the violence and the killing of innocent people in many of our inner cities throughout the country.
Okay.
Law ever become a reality in America? Some fear any nuclear, biological, or chemical attack on U.S. territory might trigger just that. And as KSLA News 12's Jeff Farrell discovered, the clergy would help the government with potentially their biggest problem, us.
From my cold, dead hands.
Charlton Heston's famous declaration captures a truly American value, the overarching desire to protect our freedoms. But gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American soil. If martial law were enacted here at home, like depicted in the movie The Siege, easing public fears and quelling dissent would be critical. And that's exactly what the clergy response team, as it's called, helped accomplish in New Orleans.
Jeff, the primary thing that we say to anybody is let's cooperate and get this thing over with, and then we'll settle the differences once the crisis is over.
Such clergy response teams would walk a tightrope between the needs of the government versus the wishes of the public.
In a lot of cases, these clergy would already be known in the neighborhoods in which they're helping to defuse that situation.
For the clergy, one of the biggest tools that they will have in helping calm the public down or obey the law is the Bible itself, specifically Romans 13.
Because the government is established by the Lord, you know, and that's what we believe in the Christian faith. That's what's stated in the Scripture.
Civil rights advocates believe the amount of public cooperation may depend largely on how long they expect the suspension of their rights might last. Jeff Farrell, KSLA News 12 reporting.
And according to Tuberville, during Hurricane Katrina, the clergy response team provided 38 chaplains a day around the clock at 8 different camps.
That includes New Orleans, where today authorities stepped up their efforts to empty the city. Bob Woodruff is there again tonight with an extraordinary human drama unfolding. Bob?
That's true, Elizabeth, and good evening from New Orleans. Here, the police and the National Guard find themselves in a very difficult position tonight to try to carry out an